Hello and welcome to Clark Art Talks. My name is Kendra Larson and I am the Clark Art Talks coordinator and Art Gallery director. Today we are lucky to have the wonderful Mark R. Smith here to speak about his work. Mark R. Smith's current studio practice involves the use of recycled textiles, which he incorporates into labor-intensive, densely patterned motifs that reference communal architecture, crowd dynamics, and the behavioral aspects of social organisms. His work has been featured in institutions across the U.S., including the Portland Art Museum, the Contemporary Art Center in Cincinnati, and the Zimmerly Art Museum at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. His solo exhibitions include the Office of the Governor in Salem, Oregon, Gallery Hlemmur in Rykjavik, Iceland, and the Art Gym in Marylhurst University in Marylhurst, Oregon, and several at the Elizabeth Leach Gallery in Portland, Oregon, where his work is represented. Smith has also received many public commissions, including projects with TriMet, Providence Hospital, and the Port of Portland. His work is included in several public and private collections, including the American Embassy in Ghana, City Arts, Inc. in New York, King County Public Art Collection in Seattle, Washington, Lewis and Clark College in Portland, and Nike in Beaverton, Oregon. Smith received his BFA from Cooper Union and his MFA from Portland State University. His website is markrsmithstudio.com, and I would just like to add that I met Mark a few years back at the Regional Arts and Culture Council when we served on the mural committee together, and I deeply respect Mark and his work. He is very enthusiastic and very supportive of art and artists in this area. So we are very, very lucky to have him at Clark. So without further ado, welcome, Mark.
Lifelong artist, but assuming that probably the majority of the group would be doing other things. And I think that's the gist of my talk, is that it's really hard to know what you're going to be doing with whatever skills you develop here in school. My work has changed dramatically. I've remained an artist, but I thought I was going to be an illustrator when I started out. Those were my ambitions. And after 1 year of college, then that was just out the window. I didn't want to be an illustrator. So keeping that in mind, I think the important takeaway would just be that in the event that you don't really know where you're going to end up, I think in the end you can hold on to these things that are really important to what you do, and that's genuine, that's real, and you can keep looking back and kind of examining, well, what was it that got me so excited in the first place? What was it when I was a young person, and just the world was open to me? What were those things that I valued so much? And presumably they stay with you throughout your life, and you can always reclaim them. You can always go back and find those things. So essentially, I'm just calling the talk, and it's more descriptors, influences, what started you out, what really got you excited. And then assuming you're going to go through some kind of change and evolution, and then finally in the end, holding on to those things that are important. And that's kind of how I'm able to stay centered and focused in my work, or to at least understand, yeah, I'm on track. Those are things that have always been with me. So let's see. And my audience are, like I say, 3/4 of my audience are of my generation. I was thinking this stuff would be kind of more exotic to people, but not necessarily. So I was born in '58, so this was my frame of reference, the 1964 World Book Encyclopedia. That was where I started, to really understand the world. And we had, volume A through Z, and then and that was my reading source as a kid. As soon as I started, and that's where I learned about the world. As biased as this was, obviously it's written for a Western audience through a certain lens, but that's where I got my information. So it's kind of my version, the analog version of the internet. And you know, I just poured through these things. And my first love, of course, was the human figure. And that stayed with me, the dynamics of the human figure in action. But the World Book Encyclopedia had these just wonderful illustrations and overlays where you could turn the pages and there would be a transparency that would, first maybe you'd have the skeletal system, then you'd have the vascular system, then the muscles, and then the skin. And I just marveled at that information. And then in particular, the human form, but then you know, more dynamically, the human form in costume. And the volume C, which is clothing or costume of the encyclopedia, had a maybe 20-page inset. They're slightly yellow, kind of off-white, that had kind of a history of costuming, both cultural and historical, obviously more Western influence. It would be interesting now to see, like these 2 pages, they're sort of white European people and then people of color, other cultures. It's interesting to see if on any pages there would have been integrating white, black, and brown people, but that was the time. And it just was fascinating to me just to see the range of clothing, the range of costume, and in particular the encyclopedic nature of the way that these things are presented. It wasn't any one thing, it was more like the whole that really fascinated me. And then the encyclopedia also featured lots of maps. And in particular, there was a certain type of map, the travel map, that just really got my juices flowing, where you could, you sort of look at a map, you see the landform, and then you see these some activity or some culturally kind of significant form representing a geographical area or a particular locale. So you know, in a moment, you know, without having to read, and I was a little kid just learning to read, but you could see what was going on in any particular region in the world just by studying the little vignettes that were included. And you see these on tourist postcards and so on. Routes, networks, these things were just an endless source of fascination to me. And then one thing in particular that I enjoyed reading in the encyclopedia was about the history, and then the history, you know, early European history was represented here in the Bayeux Tapestry, which was well represented in that encyclopedia. And for anyone that doesn't know about it, it's produced in the 10th or 11th century, and it was basically a chronicle, an embroidery, a big long embroidery of the Norman conquest of England. And so it basically plays out the entire, the entire event with these little vignettes. And of course, as a young kid, you know, I was obviously interested in the battle part and the action. So at the time, I was really fascinated with sports, and in particular the regalia of sports, the uniforms, the color. And so you have these teams, and the color to me was very important, how the uniforms matched. And then in the act of, you know, playing the game, then the colors would mix and interchange. And then, of course, these action figures, you know, kind of played out their roles. Anyone ever seen an electric football game in action? Yeah. Did you have one, Bruce?
No, I didn't have one, but I've seen it. Some friends had it and played.
Yeah, they would be probably pretty boring by
today. Vibrated, right? They didn't have any control where they went.
Yeah. There was no control whatsoever. It was total chaos.
Vibrated and go wherever they went.
Yeah, and they just kind of vibrate. So you've seen one?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. So anyway, this kind of ritual, this kind of theater ritual of the sport that really fascinated me. Those were things that I was very, very focused on. And then obviously the mail order catalogs, Sears Roebuck in particular, where you could pour through and just have endless representations of forms, like what you see in the center issue, clothing, technology, lamps, and so on. Woodworking materials, a saw, tires, pretty much everything you can think of. And then, of course, these amazing displays where you would see variations and different examples of types of tools or types of clothes. That type of cataloging or classification was really, really interesting to me. And obviously, uniforms, you could order any NFL or AFL team uniform that you wanted out of the Sears Roebuck catalog. And I was just thrilled about the combinations of color that one could arrive at, and just the idea that you could have an actual, real football uniform was great. And then once again, it was looking at the availability of all of them. It wasn't just one particular thing. And then finally, my mom was she was a biologist, a trained microbiologist, and she was always collecting samples of things and off doing experiments, and we would travel, and she would kind of be collecting the native flora of the area, and then she was, so she was kind of engaged in the science of classification too. So taxonomy is what it's called. So you have different taxonomies that represent types of things, and you want to know more about the world, so then you get all the different variants and examples, and then you display them kind of matter-of-factly. And to me, this has always just been fascinating, just in the beauty, the breadth, the variety of things. And that was a strong influence on my way of thinking. And I could just look at these things forever as a young person, and I still can today. So that's kind of my core. Finally, and I think I was mentioning to some folks earlier, I never had any real exposure to art or museums other than a reproduction that was hanging above our fireplace at my home. So that anything aesthetic, was I found my aesthetics in those items that I just was showing to people. And then, but in particular, there were always quilts around my home. My grandparents and their grandparents made quilts. This actually, I photographed the other day. This is over 100 years old. This is, just made a very, very long time ago, and they're just around. And this always has fascinated me. The pattern, the variety. If you look at the little applique insets there with the different printed material, it's just so fascinating to me to look at the variants. And so I think that informed my early aesthetics. And I haven't included, I've had tons of influence in terms of my kind of adult artistic education, but those are things that stay with me no matter what I'm influenced by, who I'm looking at, or whatever current ideas are in the air. And obviously I'm affected by those, but these things are like kind of very core items in terms of my influence. So then what I wanted to show was just a few examples of artworks, and it's pretty chronological, and it's going way, way back. That would be 40 years ago. This would be maybe my first kind of so-called mature art project, and there's vestige of it still there, but you can see my wife Maria Nasensi and I collaborated on this garden installation and mural, and the idea was to create space for a community garden. And so I had already been I'd already developed more of an activist sensibility that you can engage kind of in a social context with your work, and this seemed like a really cool opportunity that that existed in a city where land was at a premium. And so this was in a neighborhood that had been blighted at one point due to New York City's kind of financial decline. And so residents were going in there and literally carting in dirt, laying it over the rubble, and making garden spaces. And this is right in Manhattan. So this was amazing. This garden still exists, and it's a landmark. Not the artwork, the garden is a landmark. And people were able, even throughout all these kind of commercial pressures, developers and so on wanting that space, they were able to hold on to that, and now it's like a landmark park that's in that neighborhood in perpetuity, forever. So anyway, getting to the art, in terms of my contribution, I worked on the mural, Maria did the trellises, but you can see the action figure sort of thing going on. People engaged in some kind of activity, and it was all really kind of just being able to, I feel like it was still that influence from when I was very little, just kind of marveling at the variety of human activity, kind of not focusing on one thing, but looking at what the collective does together. There are a few more close-ups there. The mural's gone, by the way. There's still like an adjacent mural that is on the wall. We went back a few years ago to look at the garden, which is all grown up. The trees are huge now. And then a second mural I did, which is more sophisticated, had more stuff. This was in the Bronx. And the Bronx is one of the boroughs of New York City. It's on the northernmost border of the city. And it is defined by that shape in the upper right that you see. Is there a pointer? There. That's the Bronx. So it's really a map of the Bronx. And then all this circuitry is the New York City transit system. So the Bronx has a history of displacement. One cultural group coming in to usurp the other, beginning with indigenous people. And then, you just have these, groups and groups and groups. Now it's kind of got everybody, but at certain times in its history, there was kind of like a cultural dominance there. And so the theme of the mural was about displacement and how people navigate that and kind of manage. So I worked with kids with the same kind of activist intent to kind of bring more voices into the process. So kids designing these flags that were sort of personal symbols and so on. And then the kids were photographed, so not all of them, but some of them were photographed holding their inventions and then incorporated into the mural. And then that's just a close-up to see what's going on. And then, anyway, just a couple images to show the process. So some of the kids I was working with came and worked on the mural, and then I would go back after and kind of clean things up. It was really a great experience. And you can see the travel map was right there, fully present, fully there, that influence, but also trying to make this kind of connection with just something maybe more complex, the complex nature of the composition, but then the complexity of how cultures interact and power relationships and so on. So that was kind of the theme of that. And then in the late 90s, mid-90s, I relocated to Portland, started doing work. I haven't done a mural since. Maybe it's like having had children or something, or just getting more experience in teaching. But I continue to do public work. So this is a large-scale painting that was created for the Port of Portland, and for years it's been up in the airport. It's currently there now because of the renovation. Now it's in the car rental area, but for years it was there. And here's the taxonomic system at work. Classification, just trying to identify aspects of technology that might be involved in the port. Port of Portland is this agency that doesn't only operate the airport, but it's all of the port, all of the shipping, all of the kind of trucking industry that comes in. They regulate that flow. So this was a series of images that related to this kind of creeping interaction of technology and the subtle relationships between the port and the natural areas that it occupies. in particular, you're thinking about maybe the waterfront, like the Superfront site. So what I was trying to show, I mean, it's a kind of an artless presentation in terms of, it's just stuff and it's just things organized by shapes and type. But then trying to show that each form has a history and a relationship with something that's in front or behind it. So if you look at all of these shapes, that you can kind of read, you know, planes or trains or whatever, or natural organisms, there's something underneath it. And so they're always interacting, and there's always this kind of creeping change, which one has to be aware of and be, you know, cognizant of in terms of the choices that are there. So as my work was evolving, I went from being, you know, early on being a painter of things, you know, this figurative work, and then I started thinking, well, it's really the shape that I'm interested in. I like the dynamism of the shape, and I don't need to paint specific people. And I was thinking about quilting, and then story quilts in particular. So then I developed this painting style, or painting method, I should say, that incorporated real fabric and also paint. So wherever you see a pattern, that's actually fabric, and then where you see a solid color is where you see paint overlays. I'm just using kind of a stencil method and so on to make the work. So this is this is my method where I'm working on making the painting in little sections. Those are my work tables, and then I make the shape with a little window in it, or I make an area a rectangle, and it has a little window which is the shape, and then fabric is glued onto that and peeled up, and that becomes what you see in that backdrop image there. And there's the work in situ. It's very large scale. So thinking about, and again, it's that catalog sort of taxonomic kind of form that, you know, by this point, I don't even know that I was really aware of it. I just like doing lists of things. But over the years, I've become more conscious of, oh yeah, I keep going back to that. Why is that? Why is that so fascinating? And whatever ideology or whatever philosophy that you form, there's certain sort of internal things that are they're just you, and you channel your ideas through those methods. And so I was working with this idea of, you know, many different images tell the story, but it's no central thing. But it was for this is a commission for Lewis and Clark, so it's for a social sciences building, and I thought of what is the most successful social organism out there, and it would be a termite mound. So that is a cross-section of a termite mound, so just using that as metaphorically as an example of, look, these little creatures have it figured out. They know how to work together without, you know, kind of destroying one another. So I used that as this iconic image, and then flanked it with shapes of images that had come from the newspapers. And then that reflects just what was going on at the time. And there was the first, there was the war in Iraq, which was, you know, pretty happening at the moment I was making this. So some of that image reflects that. Some of the imagery reflects that. Some of the imagery reflects just the general goings on on a given day in a culture. And in this method, I've done a few more commissions. This is for the Providence Hospital, kind of using these kind of concentric bands, but the shapes to reflect different ideas about religion, which is here. This would reflect one's religion. This might reflect day-to-day activity. This kind of natural border might reflect the fact that in terms of what we worship or go to for solace or comfort, A lot of people find nature as kind of a gateway, like you're in a safe spot that makes you feel good. It might not be like scary nature, it might be like a park. But anyway, like nature is a gateway into this internal space where you're trying to use your internal resources to get better. So that was the theme. And then this is for the transit state, what's it called? Just the Transit Authority, State Transit Department. ODOT, thank you. Bruce also did a commission for ODOT. And so you can go and see both of our works if you go down to the state capitol and see the work. But at the time, this is relatively recent, we're just getting to the idea where we're going, oh yeah, if you have a really nice space in the middle of a city, people will come. And why don't we make it pedestrian friendly? And amazingly, this is like a recent concept, relatively recent. So this, all this stuff is having to do with, travel, technology, places that you might go, but then in the very middle, there is a commons area, like a lake is abstracted, and a park, and there's kids are playing and so on. And then around it you have, kind of the gears of industry and so on. And then, of course, I was thinking about those old road signs, those Highway 66, that sort of thing, those traditional symbols that would be signifiers for what the theme is about. So that was, but using the catalog again, the sort of the pattern, the sort of frontal kind of less, I would say, non-hierarchical placement of things in terms of making a composition. I'll end up. I'll finish up in like 5 minutes, so then there'll be questions. Okay. Close up, and then so slowly over time, the interest in fabric has continued, particularly striped fabric, and recently I pretty much let go of printed fabric and paint as well, and more recent work features mostly the fabric. And then, and I'm kind of thinking of it as this is abstraction. Obviously there are relationships to modernist work like you would see in Mondrian, Piet Mondrian, or Joseph Albers. And obviously the ideals of that period of time, we're talking about the early mid-1900s, were this universal kind of art. I love it. I love that one could be universal in terms of their approach and potentially meet people. So obviously that's an influence, but in terms of my iteration, more chatty, more friendly, more kind of, hey, come on, you belong here too. So then is the idea of taking the rectangle but integrating it, mixing, matching, making it a little bit more inclusive. And then I'm still, all along, I haven't let go of wanting to work with images, but I've really focused more on using just the fabric to try to create these kind of complex social narratives. This was created, this is prior to the pandemic and prior to the, just I say at the very beginning of the housing crisis in Portland. This was the 1% demonstrations that occupied Lonsdale Square, the two squares down in front of the City Hall building. But there was a tent city, if you might remember, in around 2011. And trying to chronicle that, it's funny, like, I don't know that I would use tents now because it would somehow, it would be almost too close to what's real. And I wouldn't want to denigrate people that are having to, live in tents for survival. But at the time, it was just this really interesting paradox to me, and I wanted to show, this is what's going on. This is a part of our culture, and this border, I suppose, is just about that kind of the multiplicity of voices that is echoing that might be coming from the people who occupy the tent. The Occupy one. Yes.
Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah, Occupy Wall Street. This is in the city's art collection. And then I'm going to go quickly on this. Working through symbolic abstraction. This is an exhibition that I did with my partner Maria about just losing loved ones. Also about the larger idea of, generational, one generation succeeding another, and then how you honor those people who have gone away, and then also what you try to hold on to through what they produce materially, but then not being able to exactly. So we did a whole show about that through abstract means, like nothing is actually, representational, so to speak. Anyway, this big work that I showed was called Time Tunnel, which is a reference to this early television show that if you can go back in time and kind of re-examine your life. And so this central area, like you kind of step into it and go back in time if you could. And Maria had interspersed that with little strands of her hair. So it has some DNA in there. All the white stripes have a little strand of hair over them. Or actually it's a stitch, I'm sorry, it's a stitch, it's a running stitch. She had done others with it. We made, all of these abstract things are about time, about passage of time. So this is a quilt, a 24/7 quilt. So it basically marks day and night rhythms, and has appropriate units for like a 24-hour day, and then a 24-hour cycle, and a 7-day week. And it has an hourglass shape, so time is always ticking. And then we made it super large, and then the bed that it's on is super small, because as you kind of move out of the world, you kind of shrink. You literally shrink a little bit if you have the good fortune of growing old. But also your world gets smaller. Like it's smaller when you start out, it gets smaller too when as you're stepping away. So that was to kind of bring out that. Then about accumulation and so on. One work I wanted to show in particular was getting back to the action figures, or just people, displays, the taxonomy. These are all hand cut out of the New York Times newspaper, and they just represent, figures that counted there. It's about 7 feet tall, and then the whole thing has a running stitch through it that Maria created. So that it's just kind of like a cycle that repeats itself. But the idea that say if you start down at the bottom, and say you're at full power, right? You start at the bottom, you're at full power. Well, as you age, your sphere of influence, at some point starts to shrink a little bit, and then you shrink individually, and then at some point you step into another realm, and maybe the process starts over again. But that was what we were trying to do to convey that, and just trying to honor all different types, all different cultures and experiences, and just include everybody in the process. And I'm not going to talk about these so much, but fabric with photo insets that are supposed to represent people's eyes. So you can look into the eyes. So these are sort of honoring, parents. Like what was your parents? Each one is kind of like a symbol for a parent or someone important in your life, and then you're kind of looking into their experiences through these portals. More abstraction, looking up at a night sky. This is all done with that fabric. And that's how the fabric, so the way these things are made, the fabric is, the shirt is taken apart, it's pressed, it's flattened, it's kind of glued to make it more stabilized, and then it's cut into sections. And so all of these are little sections of striped t-shirts, basically. That was my father's reclining chair back there. and then, you know, kind of imagining what would he be looking at when he was contemplating his life. And then, I'm not sure if I'm going forward or backward. And this is the raw stripe, the raw fabric, once it's been cut into stripes. And then finally, I'll end on this. This is a pretty recent project, Portals and Rabbit Holes, done for Meta in Seattle. So artists they've been commissioning artists to come in and just take over a site and just do something with no pre-direction, just, you know, which is great. Usually there are more constraints in public work. So I wanted to do something that was about, obviously, connectivity, you know, this kind of digital world, decidedly analog, but it's called Portals and Rabbit Holes. So one side represents kind of a discovery, like the portal, like, you know, you're on the internet and you actually find something of value, and you wade through and you find something. So then these kind of circular forms, it's like bullseye, you got what you wanted. And then the rabbit holes is the side on the left, which is like this endless kind of cycle. I do this myself. I'll start somewhere and then I just end up in some place I really don't want to be, and I've wasted like an hour and a half looking at useless information. So then there are the portals, see? And here are the rabbit holes. This is a circuit that just keeps repeating itself. So you just keep winding back and around and around and around. So using abstraction to talk about culture, trying to limit the materials, the representation. So it's kind of about people, which was my, you know, like the figure, but then, you know, the figure represented in more abstract meanings. And then in the backdrop that you see, those are all printed T-shirts that have like different slogans or, you know, graphics on them. And that is reverse the T-shirt and then show the inside. So they're ghost images or traces of these silkscreen images. That might give you some clue as to kind of the depth and variety of sources, but you know, I didn't want them to overpower, so it's just they're seen in reverse. And then that's an up close, so it's all sectioned. There's a pocket tee, right, kind of represented there, and I like to leave, you know, some vestiges of what it used to be, so that it is human. It is about people. And people will have this discovery like, oh yeah, okay, I have this familiarity with that thing, I guess it's okay then. So I think that's Tommy Hilfiger. And there's an up close of the wall, and you can see these things kind of peeking through the fabric. And, you know, more, this is the raw fabric from the Goodwill bins. And I think it's time to stop. I have more work, but you know, if you, at least in terms of my interests, if you saw what I started out doing and then you saw this, there's hard to find the connection, but then I can find the personal threads, and then I know that, yeah, I can still go back to that, and I haven't let go of certain things at all. I just have reconfigured them differently. So, thank you.
You say you were born in 1958?
Yes.
So one of the questions I've been asking people born between 1958 and 1963 for longitudinals that you're working on is, what was your most memorable experience, and what was a time where you felt your art represented that experience?
Wow. So I would have been between like 0 and 6 years old. Mm-hmm. Well, I think I said I never set foot in a museum. But I believe that I did go to one museum. It was called the Horner Museum. It was in Corvallis, Oregon, and it had weird stuff. Like it had a taxidermy moose, and it had like some hairballs coughed up by animals, like just weird, like a, like, yeah. And that had this really strong impact on me. So I can, going back to my theme, I suppose, that did affect me. It wasn't necessarily an aesthetic experience, but it was like a cultural, kind of scientific experience.
And then I have one more question. What is your favorite material to work with as a child?
Well, as a child, crayons, I had the deluxe Crayola set. I think, how many did, I mean, I had the biggest one.
64.
60, I had a bigger one, it was actually flat.
Oh, wow.
And it had all the crayons laid out. But I felt like there were maybe 100 different pigments. But I would do these kind of frieze-like drawings because I didn't know how to show perspective. So, if, for instance, if I was going to do the Battle of the Alamo, and there were like 2,000 troops from Mexico and then 180, so-called Texans, then I would try to draw them all side by side, so it would take a lot of paper.
Yeah.
And do them with my crayons. Yeah. But
And what's your favorite material to work with now?
fabric. Yeah. Just, I think over time you develop a kind of an internal vocabulary, and you don't have to question your approach so much. You have this is like, I know how to drive this car. I get in the car and I start driving, and it's so one doesn't have to start over every time.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot of really interesting space I can explore by limiting myself to working with this fabric and color.
Thank you.
Sure.
When you're working with fabric, do you sew it on the machine, or do you hand stitch it, or do you glue it, or?
It's glued, yeah, great question. So it's all just cut and mitered, or, at an angle. Mostly it's 45 degrees. But so I take the clothing apart, I flatten it, I kind of starch it, and I line the back so it's relatively stiff, and then I just cut it and then glue it. So when I cut it, I can make the form really, really precise, and have very tight seams. Well, like you can see that's every one of those is 45 degree. Every square is 4 different units. So it used to be a stripe, and they're just very closely. There, you can kind of see where the cut is. So no stitching.
I have a question about, kind of related to both our questions about fabric. Does going to Goodwill and finding these materials, has that changed your feeling towards clothing? And do you feel like these might also have something to do with the environment because of that? Isn't clothing one of the largest polluters in the world, the fashion industry? Do you feel like that's kind of come into this conversation at all?
Well, the idea of reuse or repurposing. So when I get clothing, I go to the Goodwill bins, and there's a kind of commerce related to that, where once it spends its time in the Goodwill bin, it gets bundled, and then it gets sent off to secondary markets. That would be in South America and in Asia and in Africa, and then it sort of starts its life over again, and by vendors who are selling used clothing, and so there's this interesting kind of commerce to it. Just from I always like the idea that one could repurpose or reuse things. I wouldn't buy clothes off the shelf and take it apart like that. But also it's really this cultural soup too, in terms of what happens at the bins, and kind of watch people kind of going through and collecting things and finding things, and I just like the familiarity of clothing. I guess the desired experience I would have was people would see this work and kind of be, what's this? And then at some point it dawns on you that oh wow, this is actually a t-shirt, or this isn't what I thought it was. This is not a painting. And from an aesthetic standpoint, I'm after that for the accessibility. But yeah, the idea of reuse and that there was a familiarity, I think it always has influenced the work. But I can't justify as much the production because whatever, whatever we're doing with it, we're creating waste. Well, thanks.
All right. Thank